He watched her from across the opulent dining room, a predator observing its prey. She was just a waitress, another face in the endless sea of people who served him. But tonight, something was different. Driven by aged Scotch whiskey and the servile laughter of his associates, a cruel idea bloomed in his mind. He raised his hand, calling her with a gesture. When she stood before his table, he offered her neither a compliment nor another order. He pointed a platinum credit card at her, the gesture brimming with condescension, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I will pay you $10,000 to dance for us right now. Prove you are more than just a tray carrier." The room fell silent, but Reese Coynton had miscalculated. He thought he was buying a moment of humiliation. He had no idea he was about to ignite a fire that would burn his entire world to the ground. It wasn't a restaurant, it was a statement perched on the 65th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park. Its floor-to-ceiling windows framed a glittering panorama of New York City. The air inside was charged with the scent of money, a blend of expensive perfume, aged washed leather, and the subtle, tempting aroma of truffle oil. The clinking of Cristoflo flatware against Bernardaud china was the delicate heartbeat of the room. For the clients, it was a sanctuary of power. For the staff, it was a battlefield of silent servitude. Catherine Petrova knew this battlefield well. For 2 years, it had been her entire world. Every night, she put on the starched, unforgiving black uniform. She gathered her cascade of honey blonde hair into a severe bun and trained her face into a mask of polite neutrality. She moved with an economy of movement that bordered on art, her steps silent and swift, her hands steady as she poured a 1982 CHC Teo Margot or placed a seared foie gras dish before men who would not remember her name, much less her face. Tonight, the prized jewel of Ared's clientele was presiding in the corner booth, Reese Coynton. The name was a headline, a brand, a force of nature. At 34, he was the CEO of Cint Global, a tech and private equity colossus that devoured smaller companies like a shark. He was brutally handsome, with sharp, intelligent eyes the color of slate and a jawline that looked carved from granite. He wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit like a second skin, a Patek Philippe watch gleaming discreetly on his wrist. Catherine had attended his table 3 times tonight. He hadn't looked at her once. He spoke in a low, confident murmur, his attention fixed on his 2 associates, Oliver Finch and another man she didn't recognize. They were celebrating a hostile takeover, their laughter sharp and triumphant. Catherine refilled their water glasses, her presence as significant as a gust of air from the HVAC system. "The board folded like a cheap suit," Reese said, a smirk playing on his lips. "They talk about corporate culture and loyalty. Pathetic. Everyone has a price, Oliver. You just have to find it." Oliver Finch, a man with a kinder face and tired eyes, shifted in his seat. "Maybe some things aren't for sale, Ree." Ree let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "Name one." It was then that his gaze, sweeping the room with bored possession, finally landed on Catherine as she cleared a nearby table. He watched her for a moment, his eyes narrowing. He saw the ramrod straight posture, the controlled grace in the way she bent to lift a heavy tray. To his cynical mind, it registered not as dignity, but as practiced servitude. A cruel idea, fueled by alcohol, took root. He wanted to prove his point to Oliver, to the world. He raised a manicured hand, a gesture both lazy and imperious. "Waitress." Catherine's heart gave a little leap. Being singled out by a table like this was never good. She approached with her hands clasped behind her back. "Yes, sir." Ree didn't invite her closer. He made her stand at the edge of the booth like a supplicant. He leaned forward, his voice a low murmur that carried in the suddenly silenced atmosphere. He pulled out his wallet, a sleek piece of black crocodile leather, and extracted a platinum card. He didn't offer it. He pointed it at her like a weapon. "I have a proposition for you." The smirk returning, he began. His associate sat still, watching the unfolding spectacle. "My associate here believes some people possess dignity that cannot be bought." "I disagree. I say everyone has a price." He tapped the card on the table. "I'll pay you $10,000 right here, right now. All you have to do is dance for us." A muffled, collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Catherine felt a hot flush creep up her neck. This was not a request, it was a public dissection. He wanted to see her squirm, to see her grapple with her need versus her pride, and then, inevitably, capitulate. He wanted to prove that she, like the company he had just acquired, was just another asset to be bought and controlled. "Sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Did you hear me?" he said, now relishing the attention. "Clear some space. Dance any type of dance. Entertain us. $10,000 for 5 minutes of your time. What do you say? Is your dignity worth more than that?" Her manager, Mr. Henderson, was already moving towards them, his face a mask of panicked apology. This was a catastrophic breach of decorum, but Reese Coynton was not a man to be interrupted. Catherine looked at Reese's face. She saw the cold amusement in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he had her trapped. He saw a waitress in a cheap uniform. He saw rent bills, student loans. He saw desperation, and he was right. She was desperate, but not for the reasons he imagined. She didn't think of her small shared apartment in Queens, nor her mountain of debt. She thought of her brother Nick. She thought of the sterile white walls of the hospital room, the quiet beep of the machines, the grave face of the specialist as he discussed experimental treatments for systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis, treatments not covered by any insurance. $10,000 wasn't money for rent. It was a single dose of medication. It was 2 months of physical therapy. It was a ray of hope. Her pride, the shield she had carried for years, felt thin as paper. It was a luxury she couldn't afford. But surrender was not in her nature. A different kind of fire, one she had suppressed for so long it had almost turned to ashes, began to glow in her chest. She looked him in the eyes, and for the first time her own eyes were not neutral. They were clear, direct, and contained a depth of emotion that surprised him. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Fine." The word hung in the air, electric. "But not here," she added, her voice suddenly clear and firm. She pointed to the small, empty space near the grand piano, where the pianist had just finished his set. "And I'll need you to pay up front." The smirk widened into a triumphant smile. He had won. He gestured towards the waitstaff station, and within a minute, a portable credit card machine was on the table. He swiped his card, typed the numbers without looking, and a receipt for $10,000 printed out. He tore it off and extended it to her. "Your earnings," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Catherine took the paper. Her hand didn't tremble. She folded it once and safely tucked it into her apron pocket. Then she turned her back and walked towards the piano. She began to unpin her hair. The severe bun came undone, and a cascade of honey-blonde waves fell down her back, catching the light from the chandeliers. She removed her sensible black work shoes, her bare feet making soft contact with the polished marble floor. The room was completely silent. Every diner, every waiter, every busboy was frozen, watching. Reese Coynton leaned back in his booth, crossing his arms. He was ready for the show. He expected an awkward, clumsy shuffle, an embarrassing attempt at seduction. He was about to get the shock of his life. Catherine stood in the small circle of light beside the grand piano. The lights of Manhattan burned behind her, a silent, glittering audience. She closed her eyes for a single, centering breath. In that moment, she was no longer Catherine Petrova, the waitress. The starched uniform felt like a costume, and the opulent restaurant faded, replaced by the scent of rosin and worn wooden floors of a studio she hadn't seen in 5 years. 5 years. She could hear the voice of her old ballet master, a stern Russian immigrant who saw the fire in her soul. "Don't dance the steps, Catherine." His voice a deep growl. "Dance the story. Let it bleed from you." She opened her eyes. The story tonight was one of fury and grief. She began without music. The first movement was so almost hesitant. She lifted her arms, not in a graceful arc, but as if pushing against an immense weight. Her fingers trembled, then curled into fists. Her body contracted in a silent scream of frustration so palpable that a woman at a nearby table placed a hand to her own throat. Reese Coynton's smirk wavered. This was not the awkward floundering he had anticipated. This was something more. This was control. Every muscle in her body was tense and deliberate. Then she moved. It began in her feet. A complex percussive rhythm tapped on the marble, a staccato heartbeat of anger. Her body continued erupting from its coiled tension. She launched into a series of movements that were a breathtaking and impossible fusion of classical ballet and raw contemporary expression. There was the perfect line of an arabesque held for a heart-stopping second, immediately shattered by a guttural, angular contraction of her torso. She spun a flurry of fouetté turns executed with a precision that would have been applauded at Lincoln Center, but they weren't clean and pretty. They were dizzying, desperate, as if she were trying to escape a demon. The diners were mesmerized, phones were forgotten, conversations died. The only sound was the whisper of her bare feet on the floor and her own ragged breath. Oliver Finch leaned toward Reese, his voice a stunned whisper. "Reese, who is she?" Reese didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed on her. He, a man who curated his life with priceless art, who could distinguish a Monet from a Manet at 20 paces, recognized the language she spoke. It was the language of true art, of a talent so profound it was almost violent. He felt a strange and unsettling sensation in his chest, the feeling of being utterly, catastrophically wrong. Catherine was lost in the dance. It was a torrent of everything she had suppressed for 5 years. The grief for her parents, lost in a car accident that had also shattered her brother's body. The rage against the universe for stealing her dream, forcing her to trade her point shoes for a serving tray. The fierce, desperate love for Nick that drove every exhausting shift, every sacrifice. She danced the pain of watching her own muscles atrophy, while her brother struggled to regain the use of his. She danced the humiliation of begging doctors for payment plans. She danced the desperation of lonely nights, wondering if this was all her life would be. Her movements were sharp, precise, filled with a pain that was agonizingly beautiful. A grand jeté was not a leap of joy, but a frantic, desperate reach for something just out of her grasp. Her arms, which had carried champagne trays, now carved the air, telling a story of loss and resilience. By the end, she slowed, sank to the floor, her body folding in on itself until she was a crumpled heap on the marble. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. It wasn't acting. In that moment, the weight of everything came crashing down. Then slowly, painfully, she rose. One vertebra at a time, she unfolded, her head the last to lift. She stood tall, her back straight as a rod once more. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with defiance. It was a statement. You haven't broken me. She held the final pose, chest heaving, her gaze sweeping the stunned room until it landed directly on Reese Coynton. The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched for 10, 15 seconds. It was broken by a single person. Oliver Finch, his face etched with astonishment, began to clap. Hesitantly at first, then with conviction, he stood. One by one, others joined. The silent applause grew into a sustained thunder, a standing ovation. Arid's clients, billionaires and socialites, were on their feet applauding a waitress. Reese remained seated, frozen. The applause was like white noise in his ears. He felt as if he had been punched in the gut. He had tried to buy a spectacle of humiliation. Instead, he had paid to witness a masterpiece of raw, untamed genius. He had treated a Stradivarius like a cheap fiddle. The arrogance drained from him, replaced by a cold, hollow shame. Catherine ignored the applause. Her eyes, still fixed on Reese, were filled with a cold, righteous fury. She held his gaze for a long moment, letting him see the full extent of his misjudgment. Then she turned, walked calmly to where she had left her shoes and put them on. She wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand, a gesture of humanity so raw it made Reese shudder. Without a word to anyone, not even a glance at her furious yet stunned manager, she walked directly past the maitre d', through Arid's heavy glass doors, and out into the hallway, leaving a room full of applause and a completely shattered billionaire in her wake. The receipt for $10,000 was still tucked into her apron. She hadn't earned it, she had taken it as compensation for damages. The next morning, Reese Coynton awoke to a world that was subtly but irrevocably altered. Usually his mornings were a simple ritual of efficiency, a 5 a.m. workout with his personal trainer, a glance at pre-market reports from Asia, and a breakfast of black coffee and dry toast. His personal assistant, a ruthlessly competent woman named Miss Davis, was briefing him on the day's schedule. But today, he couldn't concentrate. The image of the waitress, Catherine, he had learned her name from a panicked Mr. Henderson, was etched in his mind. Her dance played on a loop behind his eyes. The fury, the grace, the profound, heartbreaking pain. It had been more honest and real than anything he had experienced in years. His world was one of contracts, algorithms, and calculated risks. It was a world of surfaces, of polite fictions, and brutal truths hidden behind spreadsheets. The night before, she had ripped all of that away and shown him something elemental, and he had tried to buy it for $10,000. The thought made his stomach churn with a feeling he wasn't accustomed to. Self-loathing. "Sir," Miss Davis said, her voice cutting through his thoughts, "the board meeting for the Sterling acquisition is at 9. You have a preliminary call with the legal team in 20 minutes. "Cancel it," Reese said. Miss Davis blinked. Reese Coynton did not cancel. "Sir, you heard me. Cancel the morning. Everything." He stood pacing his minimalist penthouse apartment, the city sprawling beneath him. "I have a new priority. I want you to find someone for me." "Of course, Mr. Coynton. Name?" "Catherine Petrova. She was a waitress at Arid's. As of last night, I believe she is formally employed. Understood?" "I should prepare a non-disclosure agreement, a severance package. Miss Davis assumed he was doing damage control, paying for silence. No, Reese said sharply. No agreements, no money. I just want to know who she is. Everything. Employment history, education, family, everything. Use whatever resources you need. Private investigators, data analysts. I don't care. Be discreet. Yes, sir, she said, her professional mask hiding her surprise. For the rest of the day, Reese was a ghost in his own life. He sat in his office, the chrome and glass reflecting a man he barely recognized. He looked at a priceless Jackson Pollock on his wall, a chaotic masterpiece of drips and splatters, and for the first time it seemed like a cheap imitation of the emotion Catherine had painted in the air with her body. Meanwhile, the story had already begun to leak, not from the clients. Their circle was too small and concerned with appearances, but from the staff. By noon, a grainy cell phone video filmed by a busboy hidden behind a service station had surfaced online. It was titled, "Millionaire Dares Waitress to Dance, You Won't Believe What Happens Next." The video went viral. By mid-afternoon, it had 1 million views. By night, 10 million. The media picked it up. Waitress Dance at Areds was trending. The internet, with its insatiable appetite for David and Goliath stories, had found its new heroine. They called her the Angel of Areds, the Phoenix, in an apron. Speculation was rampant. Was she a Juilliard dropout, a former Broadway star, a Russian ballerina who had fled her past? For Catherine, the viral fame was a terrifying, suffocating nightmare. She had gone directly from the restaurant to her brother's bedside in the hospital, sitting with him until the morning nurses arrived. When she finally returned to her cramped apartment, her roommate Jen was waiting for her, her eyes wide, holding her phone. "Kat, you need to see this," Jen said, trembling with excitement and fear. Catherine watched the blurry video, her stomach twisting into a knot. She saw herself, a stranger on a screen, her face contorted in a mask of pain and fury. The comments were a blur of praise and pity. They saw her as an inspiration. She only felt exposed, violated. The one thing that had been truly hers, her dance, her story, was now a piece of public consumption, just as Reese Coynton had intended. "I have to disappear," Catherine said, her voice trembling. She unplugged her Wi-Fi router and turned off her phone. "He can't find me." "Who? The billionaire?" Jen asked. "Kat, what he did was monstrous, but look at this. People are offering you scholarships, contracts. A scout from the American Ballet Theater left a comment. It's charity, Jen. It's pity because some rich monster threw money at a poor girl. That's not how I want to come back. It's not about the art anymore. It's about the spectacle." She paced her small living room, feeling like a caged animal. The $10,000 she had already transferred to the hospital's billing department felt like dirty money. It was the price of her privacy. The next 2 days were a siege. Reporters began appearing at her apartment building. She had to sneak out the back to visit Nick. At the hospital, she wore a hoodie and sunglasses, head down, praying no one would recognize her. The newfound attention was a spotlight, but it felt less like a stage light and more like the eye of a prison watchtower. On the third day, Miss Davis entered Reese's office and placed a thin file on his desk. "Catherine Petrova," she announced. Reese opened it, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar anxiety. The report was concise, compiled by the best investigators his money could buy. It was a life story condensed into bullet points. Catherine Petrova, age 24. Parents, Sandra and Elena Petrova, former principal dancers with the Kep City Ballet, immigrated to the United States in 1999, deceased in motor vehicle accident 5 years ago, education, admitted to the Juilliard School with full scholarship at age 16. Considered a prodigy, she dropped out at 19. Reason for withdrawal: the same accident that killed her parents left her younger brother, Nick Petrova, age 14 at the time, with severe, lifelong injuries. She became his legal guardian. Brother, Nick Petrova, age 19, currently admitted to St. Damian's Children's Hospital. Diagnosis: systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis, severe and aggressive form, multiple surgeries, requires expensive experimental biological therapy. Employment history: a series of odd jobs for 5 years, waitress, barista, coat check girl, all cash-based where possible to avoid wage garnishment for medical debt. Finances: in excess of $400,000 in medical debt with no significant assets. Reese reread the report 3 times. The cold, hard facts painted a far more devastating picture than any dance. A prodigy who had sacrificed her entire future for her brother. She wasn't dancing for pride or for his dirty money. She was dancing for a life, for her brother's life. The shame he had felt before was nothing compared to the wave of repulsion that washed over him now. He hadn't just been arrogant, he had been cruel. He had taken a woman's unimaginable pain and turned it into a floor show for his own amusement. He closed the file. His usual decisiveness, his killer instinct, were gone. He didn't know what to do. Sending money would be an insult, a confirmation of her worst fears about him. An apology felt laughably inadequate, but doing nothing was impossible. "Cancel the rest of my week," he told Miss Davis, his voice hoarse, "and get me everything there is on St. Damian's Hospital and this experimental therapy." He was no longer just looking for a woman, he was looking for a way to reconcile with the man he had become. Finding Catherine's apartment was easy for a man with Reese's resources. Approaching it was one of the hardest things he had ever done. He changed out of his tailored suit into dark jeans and a simple gray cashmere sweater, trying to look less like a corporate raider and more like a human being. He drove himself, leaving his chauffeur and Bentley behind, and parked his discreet black Audi down the street from her building in Astoria, Queens. The building was old, the brick facade weathered, fire escapes zigzagging its face like iron scars. It was a universe away from his glass tower on Park Avenue. He stood on the sidewalk for 10 full minutes, watching people come and go, trying to find the right words. He didn't know them. Finally, he pressed the buzzer for her apartment 4B. There was no answer. He tried again. Nothing. Just as he was about to give up, the main door opened, and a young woman with bright pink hair and a nose ring emerged. It was Jen, on her way to work. She recognized him instantly from the news, and her eyes widened in a mix of fear and hostility. "You," she breathed, planting her feet firmly in the doorway. "You've got a lot of nerve coming here." "I need to speak to her," Reese said, his voice quiet. "Please, it's important." "To throw more money at her? Humiliate her more?" Jen shot back, her voice dripping protective venom. "She's not here, and if she was, she wouldn't want to see you. You turned her life into a circus. Reporters are camped down the street. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Reese had the grace to look abashed. "I know. I made a mistake, a terrible one. I need to apologize." "An apology isn't going to fix this," Jen said, but his visible contrition had softened her stance slightly. She sighed, a frustrated puff of air. "Look, she's not here. She's probably at St. Damian's Hospital with her brother. Now please, just leave her alone." She pushed past him and hurried down the street. Reese stood there for a moment, the hospital's name echoing in his head. It confirmed the file. He returned to his car, his resolve hardening. He wouldn't ambush her at a hospital. That was hallowed ground. But he knew where she had to return. He would wait. Hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Reese sat in his car, watching the window of apartment 4B. He ran a billion-dollar business from his phone, his texts and emails as sharp and decisive as ever. But his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking of sacrifice, of a talent so brilliant extinguished by circumstance. His own life had been a paved ascent with inherited wealth and sharpened ambition. He had never had to sacrifice anything. Finally, just after 9 p.m., he saw her. She was walking down the street, a small, solitary figure bundled in an oversized coat. Her hair was tucked under a beanie, her face pale and drawn under the glare of the streetlights. She moved with a weary tension, her eyes scanning the street for reporters. Reese got out of the car. She saw him immediately and froze like a deer caught in headlights. Her hand flew to her coat pocket, clutching her keys like a weapon. Every ounce of exhaustion in her body was instantly replaced by rigid hostility. "What are you doing here?" Her voice cold and flat, she asked. "Miss Petrova," Catherine began, taking a cautious step forward. She took a step back. "I came to apologize." "You came to my home," she corrected, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "You had me investigated. Don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else." Reese paused. "Yes, I did. I needed to understand." "Understand what?" she shot back, her voice rising. "That people like me aren't props for your amusement, that our lives are more than an item on a balance sheet? Did your investigators tell you that, Mr. Coynton?" "They told me you were a prodigy," he said softly. "They told me what you gave up for your brother." The mention of her brother made her flinch as if he had struck her. "You will not speak of my brother. You have no right." "I know," he said, and the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. "What I did was inexcusable. It was arrogant and cruel, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. The world sees the video, the dance, they don't see the context. I do, and I'm profoundly sorry." Catherine stared at him, her chest tight. She had expected blustering excuses, Another offer of money. She had not expected this quiet, soul-deep shame. It disarmed her. But the anger was still there, a shield against the man who had exposed her soul to the world. "Your apology doesn't make the reporters go away." Her voice brittle. She said, "It doesn't give me back my privacy. It doesn't change the fact that people now look at me with pity." "I want to help," Reese said, slipping back into his default mode. "The foundation I run, we could set up a scholarship, a full scholarship to any dance conservatory you choose. We can cover all of Nick's medical expenses. All of them. Just name your price. I'll make it right." It was the worst thing he could have said. Catherine's face, which had softened for a moment, hardened into marble. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "Name my price," she repeated, the words dripping with scorn. "You still don't get it. You still think this is a transaction. Do you think you can just throw your money at this ugly thing you created and wash it all away? My life, my brother's health, my talent are not for sale, Mr. Coynton. They never were." She took a deep breath, her eyes blazing with unshed tears of pure fury. "The $10,000 you paid me, I gave it to the hospital. It bought Nick weeks. That is the only transaction you and I will ever have. Thank you for that, and now I want you to leave. And I never, ever want to see you again." She turned on her heels and walked towards her building, fumbling with her keys. She didn't look back. Reese stood on the sidewalk, the cold night air biting at his skin. He felt as if she had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. Not for sale. The words echoed in his mind, a damning final judgment. He had come here to fix a problem, as he always did, with money, power, and influence, and he had failed spectacularly. He had thought the dance was her story. He was wrong. The dance was just the prologue. Her real story was one of integrity, and he had just discovered that it was the one currency he did not possess and could not buy. As he walked back to his car, he knew that a simple apology and a blank check wouldn't be enough. To make this right, he would have to change the very rules of the game he thought he had mastered. Reese Coynton did not become a billionaire by accepting defeat. Catherine's rejection, as sharp and absolute as it was, did not deter him. It redefined the objective. The problem wasn't financial to solve, but moral to reconcile. He returned to his world of glass and steel, not with a sense of failure, but with a new, singular purpose. His first call wasn't to his lawyers or bankers, but to Dr. Anjali Sarma, head of pediatric rheumatology at St. Damian's Hospital. He made the call himself, bypassing Miss Davis. He introduced himself, and after a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, went straight to the point. "I am informed of your work with experimental biological therapies for SJIA," Reese stated, his tone devoid of his usual arrogance, replaced by a focused intensity, "specifically for a patient named Nick Petrova." Dr. Sarma was cautious. "Patient information is confidential, Mr. Coynton." "I am not asking for information. I am offering to fund," Reese clarified. "I want to underwrite the entire research program. New equipment, more staff, full funding for clinical trials for the next 5 years, and I want to create a patient access fund to cover costs for any family who cannot afford treatment, starting with the Petrovas, anonymously. My name is not to be associated in any way. A corporate donation from a subsidiary of Cint Global. That's all." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Dr. Sarma, who spent half her time fighting for grants and begging for donations, was speechless. The sum Reese was proposing was enough to change the lives of hundreds of children. "Mr. Coynton, I don't know what to say. This would be transformative." "Just say you'll accept it," Reese said, "and that Nick Petrova will receive the best care on the planet, regardless of cost, effective immediately." "Yes," Dr. Sarma breathed. "Of course, yes." That was the first piece, the easy piece. The second was more complex. Catherine had rejected his money because it was a handout, a transactional apology. He needed to create opportunity, not charity. He needed to build a stage, not a gilded cage. He spent the next week in a whirlwind of activity. He leveraged his network not for financial gain, but for artistic consultation. He met with the directors of the American Ballet Theater, the board of the Juilliard School, and choreographers whose names were legends. He wasn't buying talent, he was learning about the world that had been stolen from Catherine. He learned about the brutal toll dance takes on the body, the short careers, the constant threat of injury that could end a dream in an instant. He learned about the thousands of talented young artists who were one medical bill, one family crisis away from giving it all up. An idea began to form, grand and audacious. It wasn't about one ballerina, it was about all of them. Oliver Finch found him late one night in the office, surrounded by blueprints and proposals. Not for a skyscraper, but for a different kind of structure. "I thought you'd be halfway to Tokyo for the Nakatomi deal," Oliver said, loosening his tie. "I postponed it," Reese replied, looking up from a document. "Look at this." He slid a proposal across the vast mahogany desk. The title read, "The Phoenix Initiative." Oliver read it, his eyebrow climbing higher with each page. It was a proposal for a new foundation endowed with an astounding $100 million from Reese's personal fortune. Its mission was twofold. First, to provide comprehensive financial and medical support for promising young dancers and performing artists whose careers were threatened by injury or personal crisis. Second, to build a state-of-the-art performance and rehabilitation center, a place where art and healing could coexist. "My God, Reese," Oliver whispered. "This is incredible. What prompted this?" "You said some things aren't for sale," Reese said, finally looking up. His eyes were tired, but clear, filled with a resolve Oliver hadn't seen before. "You were right, but that doesn't mean they can't be supported, nurtured. This isn't charity, it's an investment in human potential." He was building a world where someone like Catherine wouldn't have to choose between her brother's life and her own. As Reese built his silent revolution, Catherine fought a war of attrition. A few days after their encounter, she received a call from Dr. Sarma. "Catherine, I have wonderful news," the doctor said, her voice buoyant with a joy Catherine hadn't heard in years. "A new corporate grant just came through. It's specifically for our SJIA research and patient support. The long and short of it is this. Nick's entire treatment plan from today until he's in full remission is completely covered. Everything." Catherine sank into a chair, the phone pressed tight against her ear. She was weeping silent tears of overwhelming relief, rolling down her cheeks. For 5 years she had been carrying a mountain on her back, and in a single phone call, it had vanished. She didn't question where it came from. In a city of immense wealth, anonymous corporate philanthropy wasn't unheard of. She accepted it as a miracle. A moment of long overdue grace from a universe that had been relentlessly cruel. The weight of financial desperation lifted, but the weight of her wasted talent remained. The viral video had subsided, but its ghost lingered. She had had offers, of course, from dance companies and choreographers, but they all felt tainted by the spectacle. They saw the story, not the artist. She ignored them all, but something had shifted within her. With Nick's future secured, a small, fragile seed of her own future began to sprout in the barren soil of her life. She began waking up at 5 a.m., before Jen was awake, and cleared the small space in her living room. She would stretch, feeling the familiar pull and ache in long, dormant muscles. She would move through the classical positions, her body remembering the language her mind had tried to forget. It was clumsy at first, her balance was off, her stamina gone, but the muscle memory was there, buried deep. Each day she reclaimed a tiny piece of herself. One afternoon, a new player entered the game. Reese was in a meeting, reviewing the shortlist for the CEO of the Phoenix Initiative, when his phone vibrated. It was a name from the file he had compiled on Catherine, Bianca Dubois. Bianca had been Catherine's chief rival at Juilliard. The report had described her as intensely competitive and noted several instances of professional jealousy. She was now a rising soloist with a prestigious contemporary dance company in New York. Reese, in his deep dive, had seen her name on the program for an upcoming gala at Lincoln Center, a gala he was now a primary sponsor of. He took the call. "Mr. Coynton," Bianca's voice was like silk laced with ambition. "I heard about your incredible new initiative. I think it's simply visionary. I was Catherine Petrova's contemporary at Juilliard, you know." "I know," Reese said, his voice neutral. "She was always dramatic," Bianca continued, a subtle sting in her tone. "Such a shame what happened. But seeing that video, it brought it all back. I'm performing at the Lincoln Center Gala next month, the one you're sponsoring. I was hoping we might meet. Perhaps I could offer some perspective for your foundation, from one artist to another." Reese felt a cold prick of unease. He recognized her type immediately. She was an opportunist disguised as an artist. She saw his money and influence as a ladder, but she was also a direct link to Catherine's past. "I'll be at the gala," Reese said, his voice clipped. "Can we speak then?" He hung up, a sense of foreboding settling over him. He was building an arc for artists like Catherine, but he knew for every true talent there were sharks like Bianca Dubois circling in the water, drawn by the scent of money and opportunity. and she was on a collision course with the very person he was trying to save. The Lincoln Center Fall Gala was the glittering apex of New York's arts and society calendar. Reese Coynton, usually a reluctant attendee at such events, was now its primary sponsor. His involvement wasn't just a name in a program. The Phoenix Initiative was being officially announced that night. It was the public unveiling of his penance. He walked through the grand lobby, a transformed man. He still wore an impeccably tailored tuxedo, but the arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful gravitas. He was greeted by smiling board members and socialites, but his eyes scanned the crowd, looking for a face he knew wasn't there. He had sent a personal invitation to Catherine, delivered by a professional courier. It was simple, respectful, with a handwritten note. "This is not charity. This is a stage. It is waiting for you if you ever want it. No strings attached." She hadn't replied. He hadn't expected her to. He found Oliver by the champagne bar. "Any sign?" Reese asked. Oliver shook his head. "Didn't think she'd come, Reese. It's too soon, but what you've built is magnificent. You should be proud." "It's just a building and a bank account until it helps someone," Reese replied, his gaze distant. Their conversation was interrupted by a voice like honey over ice. "Mr. Coynton, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." He turned to see Bianca Dubois. She was stunning. Her dancer's physique draped in a backless emerald green gown. Her smile was moist and bright, but it didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Miss Dubois," Reese said, his voice politely cool, "I look forward to your performance." "I hope it lives up to the raw emotion we've all seen recently," she said, the sting aimed directly at Catherine. "It's amazing what goes viral these days. Some of us spend decades perfecting our craft. Others only need a moment of public desperation." Reese's jaw tightened. "Talent is talent, Ms. Dubois. The public has a way of recognizing what is real." Bianca's smile wavered for a fraction of a second. She recovered quickly. "Of course. It's just that I knew Kat. I know her story. I worry she's being taken advantage of. Her emotional state is so fragile. It would be a tragedy if her little moment of fame ended up hurting her more." It was a masterful performance of feigned concern designed to plant seeds of doubt. Reese saw directly through her. This woman wasn't worried about Catherine. She was terrified of her, terrified that the raw, untrained genius of her old rival could eclipse her own polished technical skill. "I appreciate your concern," Reese said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to speak to the director." He turned and walked away, leaving Bianca fuming behind her perfect smile. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric with controlled chaos. Dancers stretched, stagehands rushed, and the air buzzed with nervous energy. Bianca was in the wings, waiting for her cue. Her piece was from the second act, but her mind wasn't on her choreography. It was on Reese Coynton's dismissive tone, on the whispers about the Phoenix Initiative, on the ghost of Catherine Petrova that seemed to haunt the entire evening. She had spent 5 years clawing her way to the top, reveling in the fact that her biggest rival had disappeared. Now that rival was the most talked-about dancer in the world, all for one clumsy, emotional outburst in a restaurant. The injustice burned in her gut. Just then, her phone vibrated. It was a text from a journalist she kept on a short leash, a gossip columnist at a tabloid. Something about the mystery waitress. "Rumor is she's here tonight." A poisonous, brilliant idea sparked in Bianca's mind. She typed a quick reply. Source says Coynton brought her, making a scene, trying to capitalize on her 15 minutes of fame. She's emotionally unstable. He's exploiting her. It was a lie, but plausible. It painted Reese as a predator and Catherine as a pathetic, unstable victim. It cheapened her talent, reducing it to a side effect of a breakdown. It was perfect. She pressed send, a cruel smile gracing her lips. The story would be online before her performance even finished. Meanwhile, across town, Catherine was not at the gala. She was in a small rented dance studio in Brooklyn, the kind with scuffed floors and mirrors that had seen better days. It was the first time she had set foot in a proper studio in 5 years. The one hunt for a 2-hour rental felt like an indulgence, but one her soul desperately needed. She wore old leggings and a faded t-shirt. Her body ached, but it was a good ache. Music from her phone's small speaker filled the room. It wasn't a grand symphony, but a simple, melancholic piece for cello. And she danced. She wasn't dancing for an audience or for a billionaire's dare. She was dancing for herself. She was rediscovering her own lines, testing her strength, finding her balance. The movements weren't filled with the raw rage of that night. They were quieter, more questioning. It was a dance of healing, of putting the broken pieces of herself back together. Reese's invitation lay on the bench beside her water bottle. She had read his handwritten note 100 times. A stage. It is waiting for you. A part of her was tempted, but a larger part was terrified. She wasn't ready to step back into his world, a world that included people like Bianca Dubois. She remembered Bianca's cruelty, her accidental trips in the hallway, the whispers she'd start in the dressing room. As she finished a combination, she checked her phone for the time. A news alert popped up on her screen. The headline made her blood run cold. Billionaire sponsor Reese Coynton attempts to push waitress ballerina into spotlight at Lincoln Center Gala. Sources claim Petrova is unstable and being manipulated. The article was short, vicious, and full of anonymous quotes, painting her as a pathetic mess and Reese as a manipulative puppet master. It mentioned Bianca Dubois as a contemporary concern for Catherine's well-being. Catherine sank to the floor, the phone slipping from her hand. It was happening again. Her story, her life, was being twisted and sold by others, but this time it was worse. They were using her to attack Reese, the one person who in his clumsy way was trying to atone. And Bianca, her old nemesis, was pulling the strings. The old fire, the one she thought she was learning to control, roared back to life in her chest. They thought she was unstable, a victim, a pawn. She stood, her body trembling not from weakness but from a surge of pure adrenaline. Her silent dance of healing was over. She grabbed her purse, her coat, and Reese's invitation. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to let them write her story for her. Bianca Dubois wanted a ghost. She was about to get one. Catherine Petrova was going to the gala. Catherine was in a small rented studio in Brooklyn when the world intruded. In a moment of rest, wiping sweat from her brow, she glanced at her phone. A news alert lit up the screen. The headline, "A poisoned dart, billionaire sponsor Reese Coynton attempts to push waitress ballerina into spotlight. Sources claim Petrova is unstable and being manipulated." The article was rife with quotes from a concerned contemporary, Bianca Dubois. The words unstable and manipulated hit Catherine like a physical blow. Bianca's venom reached across the years, attempting to poison her comeback, twisting her art into a symptom of a breakdown. The silent, healing dance she had been practicing died in her heart, replaced by a cold, clarifying rage. They thought she was a pawn, a victim. She grabbed her coat and Reese's crumpled invitation. She wasn't going to hide from their lies. She was going to burn them with the truth. She arrived at Lincoln Center like a force of nature. Her street clothes a stark rebellion against the gala's finery. The name Catherine Petrova was all it took to get her past security and rushed backstage, where she found Reese in a crisis meeting. He looked up, and the shock on his face was quickly replaced by astonishment. "I saw the article," she said, her voice devoid of fear. "It's a lie. You offered me a stage. I'm here to use it." This was not the desperate woman from the restaurant. This was a warrior. Reese looked past her to the bewildered stage manager. "The program has changed," he commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "She goes on now." In the wings, Bianca Dubois froze as the announcer's voice boomed through the theater, introducing a special performance from the Phoenix Initiative. Her name wasn't called. Catherine's was. The curtain rose on a bare stage. Catherine stood center, bathed in a single spotlight. The audience murmured, recognizing the figure from the viral video. But the dance she performed was not what they expected. Gone was the raw grief and fury. In its place was breathtaking control, power, and precision. Every movement was a direct, elegant refutation of Bianca's slander. An arabesque, held with impossible strength, declared her stability. A series of flawless, powerful turns mocked the idea that she could be manipulated. She was not dancing her pain, she was demonstrating her mastery. She ended not in a crumpled heap of sorrow, but in a pose of unwavering strength, chin lifted, her gaze sweeping the theater. The silence that followed was heavy with shock before erupting into a tidal wave of applause. It was a standing ovation, not of pity, but of profound respect for a true artist. As she walked off stage, she passed Bianca, who was ashen-faced, a ghost at a party. Catherine didn't even glance at her. Her victory was so complete that her rival was no longer relevant. She found Reese waiting in the shadows. The vast, complicated space between them, filled with money, shame, and power, had finally vanished. All that remained were two people who had seen the true character of the other. "Thank you," she said, "simply for the stage." "Thank you," he replied. His voice filled with an emotion he now understood was respect. "For showing everyone who you are." He didn't offer her a contract or a check. He offered her something more. The Phoenix Initiative needs an artistic director, someone who understands what it means to struggle, someone who can build a stage for others. He extended his hand. It wasn't an offer of charity, but of partnership. She looked at his hand, then his eyes, and saw not a billionaire, but a man who had finally learned the value of things that cannot be bought. She placed her hand in his. A new dance had just begun. The story of Catherine Petrova and Reese Coynton is not just a dance. It's a powerful reminder that there's a story behind every face we see. A hidden talent waiting in the most unexpected places. It shows us that true strength isn't in the money in your bank account, but in the fire in your soul. Catherine's journey teaches us that even when the world tries to write your story for you, you always have the power to step onto the stage and dance your own truth. It's a testament to second chances, the humbling power of empathy, and the fact that it's never too late to right a wrong. If this story of resilience and redemption moved you, please help us share it with the world. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that challenge our perspectives. What part of Catherine's journey resonated most with you? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.